There's a real interesting conversation that's been started by a guy named Robin Hanson. Robin works at the Mercatus or Mercantor or whatever you call it center at George Mason University, the group that is largely funded by the Koch brothers. He's a libertarian economist, and he raises the question. I'm reading his blog here. His most recent post, this is from yesterday, is titled "A Pullable Thread of the Social Fabric." And he mentions the incels, the involuntarily celibate people. And he compares them to liberals. He says, while the two groups focus on different axes of inequality, they each organize to induce envy and identity with a deprived status. And what he's talking about with regard to liberals is, hey, there's poor people, and they're not getting any money from our rich people, and therefore we need to take money from rich people in the form of taxes, which Robin Hanson considers violence, as do the Koch brothers, and give that to poor people so that they can have health care and housing and things. So anyhow, back to what he says. They each organize to induce envy and identity with a deprived status, to hint at the possibility of violence. Obviously, the possibility of violence in the case of liberals is, if you don't give us your taxes, we will put you in prison. And to lobby for, quote, redistribution. And then he goes on to say that this is proof that policy can, in fact, influence sexual inequality. He's talking about ancient societies. He says most ancient societies had policies that influence the redistribution of sex. And this is proof that policy can, in fact, influence sexual inequality. Many people cared about this kind of inequality. You may think you have good moral arguments why such policies are bad, but as with income inequality, you should at least admit that people who feel envious and empowered to push policy may not be much influenced by your moral arguments. His argument specifically, and I've got another one of his blog posts here where he lays it out, is that, basically unattractive women should be forced to have sex with unattractive men. And this is, one proposed policy, this is not specifically from Robin Hanson, he's blogging about it, this is from Josh Marshall. This anger at women from these involuntarily celibate men who believe they are sexually unappealing, and as they are, and yet nonetheless refuse to have sex with them. The women refuse to have sex with them. One proposed policy is to have the government assign each person a sexual market value. That's what Hanson is talking about here. People can only have sex with people of their own value, and for women, the more partners they have, the further their market value number falls, sort of big data of slut shaming, and so basically the more sexually active a woman becomes, the greater an obligation she incurs to have sex with the least sexually appealing men. And the only way to up her score, in other words, to get out of having sex with these unattractive men, is through exercise, to make herself more attractive. So he says, alternating bouts of servicing sexually enraged losers and logging nonstop hours at the gym. This is the idea for women, apparently, and Professor Hanson here talking about this at some length. He's got another blog post. It's called "Food versus Sex Charity," and he says, well, before I go into all this, let's get another libertarian on to see what they think of this. Charles Sauer, libertarian economist, president of the Market Institute, author of the new book "Profit Motive: What Drives the Things We Do." MarketInstitute.org is the website. You can tweet him at Charles Sauer, S-A-U-E-R. Charles, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me on.
So Professor Hanson is arguing that it is possible to have a marketplace for sex defined by government policy, and doesn't come right out and embrace it, but certainly embraces the concept and says that it has been the case in previous societies. Really?
Well, this is just academic exploration, and the worst part here is the pushback on this has been the left's renunciation or moving away from academic freedom to think. And if you read these blog posts, you won't come away with most of the talking points you just came away with. First off, the title of the blog is called Overcoming Bias. It's an economic blog. And in this case in particular, he's talking about the horrific incident in Toronto where an incel mowed down people on a sidewalk, and this story came to light. And so it's
and in San Bernardino,
I think he mentioned. I think it's something that he mentions in his blog, but he hadn't heard of this group before. And if you look into it, the incels are the ones that proposed providing some sort of a numeric number for attractiveness. And so he looked into this, because if you read his blog, I mean, I think it makes perfect sense that the incels argument and the liberals argument for income equality seem to be the same. If the business is successful, a liberal moves them down on their chain, and they have to hire more people in the liberal's mind. That's the same argument that Incel makes. It's the same argument I've heard you make on here before.
So here's what Scott or what Robin Hanson says. This is from his blog post. This is his blog titled "Food versus Sex Charity," and he talks about you know, the problem of a man wanting food because he's hungry versus a man wanting sex because he's horny. And he says even then we treat food and sex differently. When we give food aid, we don't just give rice and beans to keep people from starving. We give them enough food to have a moderately tasty diet. He's talking about food stamps. He says we do nothing remotely similar to sex. For me, the obvious answer is that our concern about inequality is not very general compared to inequality in access to food. Humans are just not that concerned about sexual inequality, especially for men, poor men. Presumably for our ancestors, the gene pool of a tribe could benefit from equalizing food in ways that it could not benefit by equalizing sex. Is that the counter argument that he's making here?
No, this is a professor thinking out loud on his blog. You're allowed to push back. And he's also a type of professor that he has books out there. He's a futurist. He thinks in the future. I've actually hosted him at my group Prosperity Caucus several different times, and he's one of the top experts on what's going to happen when AI evolves and becomes a part of our society. What does that economy look like? Robin Hansen's a thinker, so he hears what's going on in the public. He hears the conversations, and he takes that and moves it into an economic argument so that we can actually think about it in some sort of way where we might be able to rationally talk about it.
Okay. He also talks
income inequality. You can't talk about it rationally.
He also talks about, one possible solution to this is something he calls gentle rape. He says, imagine a woman who was drugged into unconsciousness and then gently raped so that she suffered no noticeable physical harm nor any memory of the event, and the rapist tried to keep the event secret. He says most farming societies did this. A colleague of mine suggests this is gender bias, pure and simple. Women seem feminist and male chivalrous, but by railing against rape, no one looks good complaining about cuckoldry. He seems to be very upset about women who have affairs. He says, we all know, and I'm quoting him now, we all know that women tend to be more expressive about their complaints. You can't beat them for wailing and gnashing of teeth. Really?
Yep. Well, so here's the deal.
Do you endorse that?
If you ask Robin Hansen if he agrees with the way that you just portrayed those comments, he's going to say no. He was talking about what's happened in the past. He was proposing economic ideas versus what's happening. Let's compare this to the way that the liberals are. We have Joy Reid from MSNBC who just claimed a hack in the fact that she didn't say actual hate speech against somebody and ran away with it. Again, this is a professor. I don't agree with the policy solutions he's talking about. I think they're awful.
I don't think he's claiming a hack. So direct question, Charles. What is the libertarian solution to the problem of these unattractive young men who are willing to kill people over their outrage that they're not getting sex?
Psychologist. There's no market solution to this, unless maybe you could allow and legalize prostitution. That might be the libertarian.
But then these guys, I mean, prostitution's widely available. It was certainly available to the San Bernardino shooter and to the Toronto car killer. But they might argue that it is demeaning to them to have to pay for sex, or that they simply can't afford to pay for sex.
But look, let's look at the way that you're framing this question. The way that you're framing this question is ignoring the fact that Robin Hansen is a professor. He's an academic that talks about economic policy. What you're trying to do is shut an academic down from talking about policy.
No, I'm trying to discuss the policy that he brought up. You have not heard me say one. You have not heard me use one adjective to describe Robin Hansen. I'm serious.
You're portraying his thoughts, and you have been saying when you're quoting him, you've been light when you're quoting the incels versus him. But the fact is that an academic should be able to put thoughts out on the internet as long as they don't act on them. He's not up on Robin Hanson isn't somebody up on Capitol Hill pursuing these policies. He's somebody that is looking
but
at it and
but
saying,
we have
wow,
a
that's
very real
interesting.
but we have a very real problem with now we've had 2 people on this continent who have murdered a bunch of people, principally women, because they are upset that they are involuntarily celibate, that they are still virgins, and and no woman has run up to them and say, "Hey, let's have sex," and they're very upset about this. I guess neither one of us, Charles, have a solution to this problem. Charles Sauer, libertarian economist and president of the Market Institute. His new book, Profit Motive, marketinstitute.org. Thanks, Charles.